Hello, and welcome to a lock-in at the Crate and Crowbar. Today we're going to be talking about the Apple TV show Severance. Here to discuss that with me are Alex Wiltshire.
Hello.
And Tom Francis.
Hello.
Hello. So yeah, I thought this was because we've been, slightly messaging backwards and forwards about this show, and kind of, every now and again a show kind of comes along that in this age of binging and streaming, you end up watching week on week, and I always think that's, you get that kind of water cooler vibe to it, which is something that's kind of fast, disappearing in this world. Kind of show that you can kind of enjoy on a week by week basis and kind of enjoy looking forward to what's going to happen next, rather than just binging it, which.
Oh, I hate that.
I
I waited until I think you actually mentioned the show to us around the time that it was close to finishing, so there was a good backlog to binge, which is the only reason I was on board. If it was at the start of it, I would just have to wait till the whole thing is done, because I don't deal with cliffhangers as well as I used to.
See, I really did. I did enjoy the weekly thing, actually, because. I think I'm becoming more and more abstemious in my middle age, coming to
more and more what? Sorry,
not very middle age, abstemious, sort of wanting to eke stuff out, and I just enjoy the sense of kind of I can't actually satisfy my interest in what's going to happen next, and that makes me feel special.
Okay, I don't know that word.
Yeah, it's good to see that some of the streamers are still at least doing this a little bit. I think even if I do think it can be quite good if you do what you did, Tom, and actually what I did as well, which is just come in so you've got at least a couple of episodes to start you off, rather than having to. Sometimes it's nice to have a little run up.
So we started watching it on when it very very which is quite rare, but watched it as soon as it started airing. And I must admit that at that point I was slightly nervous, because I enjoyed the first episode, but I was worried. I didn't know whether it was going to be able to sustain that feeling and to actually follow up on the mystery and things in a satisfying manner.
Yeah, me
I suppose it's kind of like the Lost Burnout, but not be able to answer that or kind of feel a bit more secure in it until the next week. Am I allowed to look forward to next week? I don't.
But then,
I don't know. I felt more secure as time went on.
One of the pleasures of it for me was not knowing anything about the concept going in. So I guess we should say this is going to be a spoiler podcast. And if you haven't seen any of this, now's the time to stop and go and watch it. Because for me, one of the great pleasures was not knowing the concept and figuring that out during episode 1. And once I did figure out the concept, my first thought was, oh shit, that's a brilliant concept for a short story or a movie. I'm not sure if it's a great concept for a series, because it's so kind of self-contained. It's actually... movies, the more sort of the closer relative to a series, but actually short story feels kind of perfect for it, where especially sci-fi short stories, high concept is great. Something you can explain quickly is great. And something that sort of conjures ideas and gets you thinking without necessarily needing to back it up is great too. Like a short story can raise those ideas in your mind, then just leave. And, it can end on, the moment I really thought it felt like a short story was when you realize that he is taken this job partly to escape the grief of losing his wife, and that felt like such a sort of neat kind of button on it to kind of not quite come full circle, but just sort of give it a little twist at the end that that reframed the whole thing. That it wasn't so much about the science as the emotional role it was serving for him. And one of the things I want to sort of come back to as we discuss through this is whether it manages to justify it being a series. And that first episode really was a brilliant introduction. Should we explain what the concept is, just in case anyone is listening without having seen it?
Yes. So Severance is a show that takes place at, for the most part, on the severed floor of a company called Lumon, who are a kind of big evil core type corporation, as we are led to understand. And our characters are severed, or called Innies, which is to say they are sort of distinct personalities who have been severed from their kind of original personality to come and work in this space, and they have no memory of the outside world or the person they are on the outside, who they call their outies. And the same is true in the opposite sense, that their outies have no knowledge or memories of what goes on the severed floor.
Yeah, so
it's like the same bodies, different minds.
Yeah, they describe it as like sort of spatially connected memories, so that like as they go through the elevator, all of their outside memories turn off and all of their in-work memories turn on. And yeah, there's a difference. It's not completely symmetrical, where the outside person gets to keep all of their memories of before they started working, as well as everything else. And then their inside memories are only work and maybe we'll get into this, but limited knowledge of just anything outside of the company. So one of the things that's good about the first episode is they get this concept across by having somebody who's just been severed wake up and then go through the sort of induction questionnaire, which is like, what is your name? And they can't answer that. And what state or territory you're from? They can't answer that. And then name any state or territory in the US, and they can answer that. So they do retain knowledge of the outside world to some extent, but not their own personal knowledge. And it's an interesting question as to where that line would be, because, you know, anything you do know about the outside world is a memory of your life, right? You were told at some point she named Delaware. At some point she was told about Delaware. So that is a memory of her previous life. But obviously they have pretty strict lines. And I was interested, I actually rewatched the first episode last night to sort of see, because by the end of the series, you sure have some new context for a lot of what you're seeing in episode one. And it's very interesting. Irving in particular is so different in the first episode to where he ends up. He is so bright and chipper and confident, and he's like the Joker. And because I'd forgotten about the whole "what's for dinner, kids" thing. He says, just like the most bizarre bit of work banter. And the others have a list of 8 reasons why they hate that greeting. But he also, when Dylan's getting all excited about his waffle party or sort of fantasizing about it, and Irving is like, mocking it as being, your reward for hard work is a child's breakfast. And that really sort of stood out as like, that's quite a specific thing to know about the outside world, that the waffle party is a child's breakfast.
Yeah, it's an interesting one that his character goes on such a journey. It's kind of it's strange that that you're able to pick up on that rewatching, because I haven't gone back yet, and I'm interested that's the case, particularly with him.
I forgot all about that questionnaire and its significance now. Like, that's really interesting. Because one of my questions was, like, what do they know about the outside world? Because we know that they have a general awareness of what's outside, and yet obviously no specific.
Maybe they're only allowed to know.
But that's an interesting wrap up.
Maybe they're only allowed to know the state of Delaware and what waffles are for.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Just having a little Google around about the show's influences, and I just found this interview just now which said films like The Truman Show, Office Space, Brazil, the video game The Stanley Parable, and the Dilbert comic strips.
Yeah. I was really struck by its sort of Stanley Parable feeling from the very first episode. It's like that. I thought also there was a bit of sort of Bioshockiness in there as well with the presentation of Keir. Keir Egan, the founder of Lumon. And the
that
way
aspect
he's
of it,
kind of go on,
deified. That aspect of it was surprising to me, because I went into it kind of thinking it was going to be. I was thinking Office Space, and I was thinking Dilbert, and sort of a parody, especially like a modern parody of the modern workplace. And then once it starts getting to Egan and this sort of the perpetuity wing where they study the history and all the kind of like, it's a cult, it's a religion, it's like all of which, like, I get you could sort of say there's culty religious elements to some modern workplaces, but I don't feel like that is the spirit of the sort of, when we talk about work-life balance today and the kinds of jobs that people have and the ethics issues around them. It's almost the opposite, where like nobody really gives a fuck about their job and they wish they didn't have to work for these horrible corporate overlords. And there isn't a big problem of people like worshipping Jeff Bezos, amongst Amazon employees anyway, as far as I know.
I don't know about that. I really don't know about that. Yeah, I think corporations, where we're going, now let's talk about this now. I think the corporations obviously would like their employees to be slightly cult-like in their appreciation of them, by calling Googlers. And I was very upset to find out that Microsoft workers are called Microsofties. Very
What's the Meta one? Isn't there a new one for Meta employees now that they've changed the name?
Oh, yeah. Oh, God, I can't remember. But it's horrible. I remember it's horrible, and I remember laughing about it. But I think that there are certainly some people that work at companies that are like that. But I think that actually Severance is looking back in many ways to some of the older corporations and the way that they controlled people's lives. The kind of corporations that would build a town.
Yeah.
And basically people would live entirely within the company, despite going home to their, because the houses that they were. Yeah, and that's what I was thinking. Companies, there are loads of examples of these kind of model towns, built by companies all over the UK, but obviously in the US as well. And I'm struggling to think of any examples at all. But what's also interesting is that the exterior shots of Lumon's building are of a building designed by the architect Eero Saarinen, built for Bell Labs. It was the Holmdel complex in New Jersey, and Bell Labs definitely has that sort of corporate, but also slightly cultish feel to it, because like workers there would be very proud about where they worked. It had a sort of a history of technological kind of development and a fierce pride in what it developed. So, for example, at that particular place, the Holmdel complex, that was where radio astronomy was developed in the 30s. That's where it was invented that you could look out at the stars using radio waves. And weirdly enough, I think that it's not really looking at today. It's looking at yesterday, but definitely with today's kind of, with a full awareness of today's attitudes and how they resonate.
Yeah, I went into the show kind of expecting it to be a satire on corporate life and stuff like that, and it really isn't. Like I think it, even the title suggests it, and kind of the idea of like a work-life balance, as you say, Tom. And actually, it does go much weirder than that. And I do think that like the quasi-mystical aspects of business and of enterprise and of corporations are kind of more in its gaze, and they exist in the world as we know it today in a slightly different form, in the kind of personality cults of our Elon Musks, and even our kind of disparaging personality cults of someone like Jeff Bezos. We kind of, there's a sort of tacit admiration there, even while we all sort of acknowledge he is the devil incarnate. And I think that Severance is really interested in kind of expanding that kind of the kind of weird pseudo-mystical, pseudo-religious kind of side to these personalities behind these big corporations. Just to kind of go back to the sort of show as it kind of unfolds, we find the characters working in this space, focusing mostly on Mark as our kind of main, played by Adam Scott. And obviously, as the show goes on, what happens is that we discover more about the company and what's going on there, although there are significant holes as Series 1 wraps up. And we also sort of, delve a bit more into the past of the characters as they are on the outside world. I think we can go through kind of deftly episode by episode and just touch on some moments. I thought it was worth maybe just sort of skipping through some of the characters in the show, because I think one of the show's great strengths is its cast. Isn't really a weak link amongst them, really. Actually, I would say that there's one significant weak link, and I think Patricia Arquette, I think her character doesn't quite land.
Do you think because of
so
her
she plays,
performance or the character itself?
I mean, the character itself is a kind of an elusive character. You know, the fact that she is, you know, this kind of, cult member for Egan. You know, we see her worshipping at an altar in her house, but the fact that she can also slip into this different kind of persona of the woman who lives next door to Adam Scott, and can also, give like exquisite breastfeeding lessons and all that kind of stuff.
That was weird. And she can also drill a hole in a man's head at a funeral without anyone knowing. Like she's sort of a weird super agent somehow.
Yeah, I mean, in Ben Stiller's show he did previous to this, which was called Escape at Dannemore, which I can really recommend, which is like a prison break.
Yeah, she's in that, isn't she?
She's in that, and she's amazing in that. She's just kind of absolutely disappears into that part. I think she's an incredible actress. Sorry, I shouldn't say actress, actor. I just think that this part is written weird, and I think it doesn't quite get to where it needs to be, particularly as her subordinate, Mr. Milchick, I think is a real highlight in this.
Yeah,
played by Tremel Tillman. What a character he is!
Yeah, he's awesome. Like I mean, like the memorable things that he does, like the dance party, was quite remarkable. But actually, it is sort of everyday kind of the way he just, you just don't know. I'm really struggling to. You don't know how to take him at any time. You just know that on a dime he can become very angry or very friendly or start dancing. And I thought that. But the fact utterly believable at all times.
The fact that he's non-severed in this almost entirely severed split space, and I think it's the fact that because he's concealing so much, yet he also seems natural as well. He seems like such a natural at being in this space. But we can still feel from him, his kind of irritation or his independence, even though he conceals it incredibly well. And I think his performance really, really sells that. And everyone else is just fantastic. Adam Scott, he's a great kind of everyman actor, but I actually think he does some really lovely work in this as well. I've never seen him be quite as soulful as he is in this show.
It's very interesting right at the start of episode 1 where he is the voice that Heli is hearing when she's lying on the table. And at first he's the sort of mystery voice. And, it almost starts as if she's going to be the protagonist. And he's this sinister voice on the radio. And then later when we get it from... actually, even just at the end of that scene, the door opens and you see him standing at the door. The way he's standing is very weird. He really looks like a sort of a villain in a horror movie or something. He's like, his arms are just like a little bit too far out from his body. And there is something a little bit weird about his face. I feel like, I don't know if it's something he's doing as an actor.
He's a very odd-looking man.
But I think, especially here, like he's in everything else I've seen him in, he's always just like fuzzy and friendly and the soft guy. And here he just looks a little bit more sort of gaunt and kind of a little bit more angular somehow. I don't know if that's something they've done intentionally, but it works really well.
Yeah, maybe. Like you're right. But his face does change, like from moment to moment. Like sometimes he can look almost hawk-like, and sort of, and other times, he can look sort of warm and friendly. It's
The character says to him later that, like, you think you don't carry your sadness into the severed floor, but you do. You just don't know. You don't know how to recognize it, And I think he sells that concept really well.
I have to say, going back and watching episode 1 again, that does not come across if that's supposed to be. If he is trying to communicate that in his performance, because fair play. In the first episode, they're trying to sell the opposite, right? The concept of the show is that you don't carry anything in, and so they have to explain that first before they can start to question it. And so his performance is actually, there's loads of details I missed the first time through because I didn't know what the concept was. So when he goes in the elevator, there is a sort of FOV effect going on where it kind of is a crash zoom where you sort of zoom in and you change the lens as well, so that the he doesn't get any bigger on screen, but the relative distances of things appears to change, and we can tell that's supposed to signify something. I interpreted it as like him. I was thinking of in terms of like a limitless kind of concept where like he's sort of his brain is waking up or something, and I got that from it. Anyway, then there's the extremely long walk down the corridors to where he actually works, during which he's just sort of a picture of contented worker. He just looks very casual because we've just seen him crying in his car, so that's the kind of the contrast they're trying to sell. Yeah. And there's a really nice moment where he's just sort of walking along. It walks so long that he sort of ends up patting his pockets, I think, and he finds a tissue in there and doesn't understand why it's there. It looks kind of puzzled at it, and then like tosses it sort of very neatly and very sort of proudly into a bin. Like that's the only thing on his mind is if he can toss these tissues into the bin really well, and looks very pleased with himself when he does. And then a moment later, he sort of sniffs a bit, and you realize he's got the sniffles, and he doesn't really know why. And so all these clues that he's just been crying are completely lost on him.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really nicely framed, and then the fact that we meet Heli in that sort of close to that point in that first episode, and you kind of see her realization of the situation and panic at this bizarre situation she's kind of woken up in.
Well, I just thought another fantastic performance from Britt Lower, who's an actress I keep saying actress, an actor I haven't seen before. I think she communicates because she never accepts her predicament, and the way that she portrays her, like that kind of barely contained anxiety and fury at the position that she's been put in, and that she only ever has like varying degrees of that, like she never moves beyond that point really, or if she does, she kind of comes back on it. And like I really like that. I really like that she is a defiant character who sort of refuses to be broken, but is also really amiable and likable at the same time,
Yeah, she has to do so much work there. Like there's such a range she has to communicate whilst making none of it seeming as inconsistent with each other. Like, because she's literally suicidal, in I think it's episode 2 or 3, she tries to kill herself.
Yeah.
And at the same time, she's also kind of the fun one of the group.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, she's sort of joking around in a way that, like, in the way that she's. Well, it's because her experience is kind of mirroring ours as the audience, because we're also new to this place and we can't understand the reverence that these bizarre 3 other characters seem to have for their work, whatever the hell it is. So her kind of, what the fuck are we doing here? It's kind of, you can't help but kind of sympathize with all that.
It's very interesting because she, like the typical way to do something like this, where you're sort of, the thing you want to explain is an institution and a system that already exists, is you have your protagonist be new to it, and then everyone has to explain it to the protagonist. And so we go along with the protagonist and we follow them on their journey. And here they've split that into 2 roles. So there is one character who's new to it, and then not the protagonist. Adam Scott's character is the protagonist, and he has to explain it to her. And so we have this interesting split where Heli sort of feels like she's going to be a protagonist, but then isn't. And at first I was a little bit, not upset, but a little bit disappointed in that, because everything else about the show is quite fresh, and it sucks a bit that the main character is a white guy with a dead wife. Like that part feels pretty, what's the word? Kind of old-fashioned. And I was sort of hoping she would be the protagonist. And she obviously does feature heavily. And by the end of it, we know why she can't be the protagonist, because the main thing you need for the protagonist character in the show is to show both their outside life and their inside life, so you can show the contrast. And to show her outside life would not work given the role she ends up playing. So by the end of it, I've made my peace with it. But yeah, splitting that duty is it worked pretty well for just letting them do a load of exposition, but also letting the character that they're actually focusing on be someone who's used to this.
Yeah, exactly.
I really love the way she dresses as well. It's an interesting thing about this world is that these characters don't dress themselves. They arrive, dressed, and I particularly love her kind of exquisite office wear. Contrasted with Dylan's slightly more schlubby look, or it's kind of they look great. They look like a real when the four of them walk down a corridor, as they do quite a lot in this show. They look like a real kind of pack of weirdos. It's great.
Dylan, I love Dylan.
Yeah, Dylan's so good.
I really love Dylan.
Great performance too.
I think there's something glorious. There's always a guy like him in an office, right? And in any show about an office, there's always going to be a character like this, the kind of slightly base arsehole, kind of Joker type, who's also a kind of job's worth and, and a stick in the mud and all that sort of stuff. But again, just the performance of this character, it just kind of takes it so far beyond that. This particular weirdo and kind of the way he relates to the others is just really, it's just great fun.
Yeah, I love that in a lot of ways he's the rebel one. He'll be profane and disrespectful to the whole system and everything, but at the same time the gamification of the job has completely got him hook, line and sinker. He is completely locked into and doing a great job as well, because he wants all the little rewards. He wants the finger trips and he wants the waffle party.
He's really proud of the finger traps, but he's like, he's the least rebellious of all of them. Despite the things he says, he does nothing actually until the end of the series to actually go countermand anything. In fact, he's always the one who says things like, no, we mustn't do that. We can't do that. No, it's too dangerous. We mustn't, but which is a fun kind of counterpoint to the fact that he's the one most likely to mouth off and to say stuff.
The line there is sometimes hard to draw, because a lot of his rebelliousness / obedience, depending on how you want to look at it, is his absolute murderous hatred of optics and design, where he's ready to fucking destroy them with his own two hands. And that could be seen either him, he's willing to physically attack other employees, which is a very rebellious thing to do, but at the same time he's sort of bought into his division loyalty so zealously that I think you can definitely call him a company man as well.
Which is funny because it's John Turturro's character, Irving Bailiff, who I figured was the company man. He's the one that is deferential to the symbology of the company and the meaning of the company and all that kind of thing. But actually, he's the one that breaks the most rules. He's constantly wandering off and kind of endangering stuff in other people's eyes.
Yeah, I think that's the strength of that, is that they set him up as the company man in order to show how significant it is that he breaks those rules to see Burt.
Yeah.
It's genuine. Burt, played by Christopher Walken, in full Christopher Walken. I don't mean Christopher Walken. It sounds like Christopher Walken doing a Christopher Walken impression. But he's really full blown.
What a piece of stunt casting for that.
Yeah, fantastic. And the fact that he's just in these kind of crappy overalls, designing posters and sort of running his fingers admiringly over printer paper. It's great.
I must admit, I found it slightly jarring, because I'd watched what I'd given up on. There's a Bristol set comedy drama that's been running called The Outlaws. It's set in Bristol. It's Stephen Merchant's project. I didn't think it was very good. And in walks fucking Christopher Walken into this incredibly British and really quite mundane little comedy drama. What the fuck is he doing in Bristol? And I'd kind of just about got my head around him being there. And then, fucking, whoa. And now he's here being Christopher Walken. I found it very hard, very, very hard to deal with, but not with no fault to Severance or Christopher Walken.
I think the relationship between him and Irving is genuinely touching, and genuinely sweet. And I like that there's a little sort of 1984 sort of going on for that character there, where he's what makes him rebel ultimately is his heart and his feelings, and a genuine connection he has with this guy, which is weird and wonderful, and yeah, I was surprised by that element of the show, and I thought it was really well handled.
I thought that I mean, I'm kind of zooming right to the end of the series at this point, but I just wanted to sort of note that I really loved the way that for a show that's about mystery, it really did finish some their arcs, some of these characters' arcs in a very satisfying way, while also leaving lots to be further explored. For example, so Irving's kind of that relationship with Burt, seeing that Burt in the outside world has a relationship with a man, and therefore is taken. The fact that we see and the stuff that happens to Adam Scott as well. Mark Scout as well. I thought that the arcs that are set up for a lot of the characters are really nicely taken through, while also kind of left for a second series.
Yes, and when we get there, I think that's sort of my. I mean, it's sort of not even. I guess I think that the show generally, to sort of answer the question that Tom was posing at the beginning about whether this was better for a short story or a movie. I mean, TV's often very good at beginnings and often very good at endings, and not too good at the middle. And what happens, while we're sort of making time before we get to those ending points. I think this show ended really, really well, and I think it did a really good job of paying enough off while keeping enough back for kind of each of the characters.
Yeah.
I actually didn't feel that way. Not the second to last, the one before the second to last episode, the third to last episode, ended on a big cliffhanger, and then sorry, no, I'm getting mixed up. There's this second to last episode ended on a big cliffhanger, and then the final episode also ends on a big cliffhanger, and I'm okay with both of those things individually, but I don't feel like this final episode resolves the penultimate episode's cliffhanger. Penultimate episode's cliffhanger is Dylan setting up the overtime protocol and giving everyone a chance at to kind of get the word out. And will he be caught doing that, or what will the outcome of that be? And then the whole last episode is just what they do with that time, and we don't really get closure on the whole endeavor. We're still mid-heist at the end of that, and so I was really left thinking, I just wish they'd wrapped up a little bit more. I think
I don't know, that goes back to what we were saying at the start, Mr. Abstemious.
Yeah, I just want I don't want total closure, but I just want to feel like this was a thing that works in its as a whole unto itself. I just want it to be one series. I didn't want it to be two. First I wanted it to be a short story, then I wanted it to be a movie, then I wanted it to be only one season. Maybe at the end of season 2, I'll be like, okay, well, now I'm happy with 2 seasons, but there better not be a third.
Well, I mean, it's this thing I think I've said on every single one of these podcasts I've done when we're talking about TV shows, is that TV has this just inescapable need to do as many episodes of any given show as possible, which is almost never the necessary amount for any given story.
Yeah.
If every story that you can, imagine has an ideal amount of time that you could spend on it, I think. And TV doesn't care about that. TV just wants loads and loads and loads. And, if you work in TV, as I sometimes do, and you pitch a series that has 6 episodes or 8 episodes, they'll always say 2 more than that. Because 8 episodes is better than 6 and 10 episodes is better than 8. And in almost every single television show you ever watch, the middle 2, or the kind of, if it's a 8 episode series, then episodes 6 and 7 or 5 and 6 will always be crap, because the story's got to the point where they just need to go and do the thing that they're supposed to do, but they can't do it yet because they need to spend another couple of episodes hanging around
this one
before they do that.
This one has, I would like, off the top of my head, there aren't 2 episodes that spring to mind as being filler, but there is this strange sort of split in it where early on it's all about PT and ultimately this doctor who has reintegrated him. And that really feels like the main thrust of the whole thing. This is all about this doctor. And then suddenly it just all stops and we never hear about it again. And then it's all about the overtime protocol. And it almost feels like 2 mini seasons.
Yeah, I agree with that. Although I was also slightly relieved that the PT story wasn't going to be the backbone of this one, because I don't know, him hiding away some guy and the sort of, I don't know, I wasn't looking forward to that kind of a story. I wanted it to delve into the mysteries rather than to have most of the drama about kind of will they find PT.
Yeah.
I was quite pleased when it, sorry PT, but I was pleased when it died.
Well, the show does write a few checks that it then, realizes that it doesn't need to cash anymore. It kind of, there's a few things like that drop away. And again, that's one of those things with TV where, like, as you're writing the first series of a TV show, you're also discovering what your show is. You're working out.
I wonder about that. Yeah.
And I think, and also you can imagine, like, well, let's have a second series. We'll leave a bunch of stuff to kind of reveal then. I do think that the series ends well for me. I mean, I often what happens with these things is someone hasn't written the ending. I guess what you want with these things, with like a series cliffhanger, is you want the sense that the ending has been written or conceived of. You just haven't got there yet, rather than the feeling of, like, in the worst era of Lost, where it's like, oh, they've just written a bunch of stuff to give themselves, the challenge of writing of when they come back from their holiday next year. Like, how do we get them out of this situation? That'll require some really, really great imaginative writing that we won't actually be able to do when we get there. But I thought this. The finale here gave the impression of for example, the bit of information that Adam Scott, the fact that his Innie realizes that his wife is alive on the Severance floor, and he's able to deliver that piece of information rather than them having it made as a discovery and then not being delivered to the rest of the characters. I felt like there was a few bold choices there that they made. Also having Heli, say the thing out loud that she says in her speech. Yeah. I think for me that meant if there would be a version of the show where they didn't do any of that stuff and kind of kept themselves back from it. If you watch the recent series Loki, that show was a absolute masterclass in not bothering to write any kind of conclusions or any kind of sense of an ending for anyone at all, and literally it's like the writers have just stood up from their keyboards and walked away, and they've gone like, right, end of series 1, and I thought Severance did a much better job of that.
Yeah, it definitely doesn't. It doesn't feel shy about making progress. Like I never felt that sense of like, oh, it's the worst sense is that stasis thing or the reset button where like, oh, they almost got away, but no, this thing undid it all, and so now they're back to where they were. Definitely doesn't feel like that kind of show. It's not afraid to make big changes.
Yeah, and I really hope that series 2 doesn't open with no one remembers anything and we have to spend 3 episodes getting them back to that, because I hate it when that happens. It's really annoying.
If we want to jump back to episodes just for a bit, this is going way back now, but the thing that really sold me on the show, when it really clicked for me, was actually episode 2, but it links strongly back to episode 1, where in episode 1 we see Heli is allowed to attempt to escape. Like they'd say, there's a stairwell, go through it. And from her perspective, we see her walk through the door, and it's as if there's just another corridor through the door. Like she is flipped around 180, but she's not aware of any kind of turning in any way. And next she tries running through the door and she comes flying back out. And it looks like just a kind of neat cinematic effect of this. By this point, we've had the concept explained to us. We know that she can't leave and she won't remember. She won't remember her time outside. But at the time, it just sort of. I assumed there was some cinematic license being taken in terms of what she would experience going through this. And then in episode 2, we get to see the other side of it. I actually forgot this, but we get almost a whole episode of Heli outside of Heli's outie, which is actually kind of huge now that we know who Heli's outie is. But there's not much. There's a few clues in episode 2. There's things like Milchert says to her, like, we all think it's incredible what you're doing here. And when we heard you were coming here, we thought it was a miracle. Some things which I remember bumping on at the time of like, what does that mean? And then we get to see her each time she was ejected from the workplace by her Innie, stumbling out of it and then deciding to go back in. And you realize it'd be interesting to like see someone splice together the footage, because they pretty sure they line up perfectly. Like, there's a reason why one time in the first episode she comes back in with velocity, and Milchert advises her to like maybe take a run at this time, or maybe do it with some oomph this time. And so she, the outie Heli is trying to sort of convince her Innie to go with it by going in with some gusto. And it actually even makes more sense now watching it back, knowing who she is, because when I first saw it, I remember thinking like, surely this is a red flag for her that Innie keeps trying to leave. Like, this is you would have second thoughts at this point, surely. Like, your Innie keeps trying to throw herself out of this building. But now that we know she is, part of this institution and a believer in it, and someone who's sort of doing this as a almost like an experiment or a sort of eating the cat food kind of thing to prove that the company is good. And we learn midway through the series that she doesn't consider the Innie to be a person. All of that actually makes it make a lot of sense. So that one little thing in episode 1 that initially was cool but seemed like a bit of cinematic license, probably cheating a little bit, the more the show goes on, the more honest you realize it was, the more sense it makes, which is so clever.
Yeah, I'd completely forgotten about that. The fact that we see her on the other side, and I just really enjoyed. And I thought about you, Tom, like the logic of the situation that she finds herself in, where she's trying to go out into that stairwell, and then what you witness her then experiencing, and that making no sense at all when you watch it in that episode. But then you discover about you see the other side of it, and then suddenly it all just. You suddenly understand exactly what the physics of this setup kind of allows.
Actually, there's one question I do have. Be interested in you guys' thoughts on it. Is why Adam Scott? I'm going to keep forgetting his character name. Has to stand. Can't watch it. He says, "I can't look. I'm not allowed to see." My interpretation at the time was that the reason he shouldn't be in line of sight to the door is that when she comes back in, she'll sort of see the time jump, and that would somehow not be what they want. But actually, that doesn't make a lot of sense, because they're not trying to trick her into thinking time hasn't passed, right? So I don't totally know why he's not allowed to see it.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, is it that he's not allowed to see into the stairwell? Well, you said that, didn't you?
Maybe he's not allowed to see like the interactions between Milchert and her. Like Milchert's going to say some shit to her to send her back in, and they don't want that to be sensitive.
Oh, if he sees, so it would mean that Heli's outie would see.
Oh, that's true.
Mark on the inside.
That's probably it.
Because you're not meant to know anybody you're working with.
Yeah, good point.
Well, it's funny that the show, the show which is, could have been about work-life balance and corporations taking everything you have, kind of isn't so much about that, because the fact that the Innies don't get to sleep, that they live a continuous conscious existence, that's a really frightening idea. The fact that there are these kind of time jumps for them, that they get in the elevator on, and then instantaneously for them they're getting out of it again, and the show has some fun with that, but again, it's less interested in exploring that aspect, actually.
Although I found myself thinking about it a lot, because it's such an alien thought to consider an experience where you are constantly, as far as you're concerned, you're constantly conscious, and you're only in one physical space. You're with the same group of people, and time doesn't seem, you have no connection with kind of the seasons or, time in general. Like that experience. But what I love about it, it's thought through enough that sort of, presumably, I guess that the show feels that the human mind is by the fact that the human being has rested in between the work days. That's enough for a brain to kind of just be able to take it without going absolutely mad.
Yeah.
Well, and the fact that they've got all these weird ways of placating them, where they just set the kind of standards at a really medium level, so that a reward is having like a melon party.
Yes.
It's not like having a big like blowout where you get to get drunk or anything like that. Often these, in the Matrix, there's all this kind of idea that if you give people too much freedom, they'll go insane, because the sense of freedom will make it not seem real to them. So you have to give them like restrictions, but also the illusion of freedom. And the way that they've done that is with melon and finger traps and all these kind of weird objects. The egg bar.
Amazing pair of words. I wonder how different it would be to just going to sleep. Like if you go to sleep and you don't have any dreams, or you don't remember your dreams, you still have a sense that time has passed, right? You don't have any memories for that period. So, in my conscious experience, the last thing I remember is going to bed. Now I'm awake again. But I don't feel like, oh my God, I'm awake again? I'm bored of being awake. You can sort of have the recharging effect without remembering anything about it.
That's true, and we do know that there's certain aspects of consciousness that bleeds through from one state to the next. There are memories. There are like, I don't know, shadows of experiences which that they're kind of vaguely aware of in certain circumstances.
I wonder.
So obviously, go on.
It would suck because the idea of being refreshed, great. That sometimes happens when you go to sleep, and sleep is one of the more refreshing things. But actually, like the 9 o'clock arrival at work is not actually a time in your life when you feel super refreshed. Like a lot of people arrive at work thinking, "Oh, fuck's sake, really?" And so for the innie to just sort of like you end a day feeling kind of tired and maybe satisfied with what you've done, and then you just immediately snap to like, "Oh God, like I'm barely awake." I also wondered, like, because we see Mark drink a lot, and do we ever see him hungover? Because that would be an interesting thing. Because you can't just forget that you're hungover.
I mean, if he drinks a lot, maybe he doesn't get hangovers anymore. But I mean, if one of them has got sniffles going in, then he's crying, isn't he? They might, yeah.
I wondered if he's hungover so often that the innie is just used to that as being basically the status quo. That he's just accepted that as a feeling that you have at all points, and doesn't really realise that there's anything untoward about it. One of the questions that you posed in our little document here, Tom, was about the politician's wife.
Yeah.
Who we meet eventually.
That's actually, I had a bunch of questions, some of which I think are supposed to be open. That one I thought, like, maybe I'm supposed to know what's going on by now.
Yes, you do get an answer to that eventually. So she has been severed for the purposes of childbirth, basically. So in the episode where we're at the sort of lodge, and she goes, Adam Scott's sister goes wandering looking for coffee, and she meets the richer pregnant lady who's giving birth, and then she doesn't recognise her later, and then she's at the party at the end, and she references it. So she is being severed for the purposes that when she has a child, it is her innie who does that.
So is that just a case of like that birthing retreat is the sort of severed location where like her memories will just be for that location and never again?
I guess so, or maybe they just flick a switch for her, like the overtime protocol or something like that. Maybe it doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be spatially kind of.
That thought occurred because I thought that would be quite a neat way of doing it if this whole technology is based on spatial location, that you have a specific place you go to for the birth, and then that would tie the memories to it.
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was one of the most nightmarish concepts in the show. Because she says, I think she says she's got 3 kids, and imagine being a being who is brought into existence basically, only to go through the agonizing, childbirth process and then have no, memory of that child, and your next memory is coming back to give birth again, just like awful.
Yeah, it's
really frightening.
This actually, maybe this is a good time to talk about it's the philosophy side of things, because this digs into the concept of like what is a person, and are the innies and outies distinct people? Well, they're definitely distinct, but are they both people? And when it's innies and outies, I feel like that's an easy question in the sense that the innies just are people. Like they have more limited lives and everything, but it's pretty hard to convince yourself that that's not a person, and that sort of ending them doesn't have any significance. But when you talk about these more extreme cases of like someone severed just for sort of a couple of hours or something, is that couple of hours chain of memories? Is that a person? I think that starts to get into the grey area.
Yes, and in the final episode when we get Heli kind of talking to the surviving Egan, her dad, I think he might be called Jamie Egan. And he talks, he kind of, in the way he's talking to her, he suggests that he has some sort of, that he sees Severance as being infinitely purposed. I think he wants to use a technology in all kinds of different ways, which suggests all these instances of people's personalities being popped into existence and then out again, for all manner of awful purposes. The show kind of has the characters in the show kind of have that assumption, I guess, that it's sort of out of sight, out of mind, isn't it? It's a kind of like, well, exactly. If I don't know what's happening, I can't imagine that it's good, but because it's not happening to me and because I can't see it, then it's fine. And I just don't have to worry about it. It's like that philosophical model of that guy came up with a while back about, poverty, and the idea that if a child was drowning in a pond in front of you, you'd be duty bound to rescue it. And the fact that, just because you couldn't see it doesn't mean that you shouldn't do anything. And he used that as an idea of like, that's how worldwide poverty basically is. Just because we can't see it, then we don't feel duty bound to do anything. And I don't know.
And on that basis,
it's a terrible thing they're doing.
Yeah. And I think that on that basis, it's sort of weirdly, the show isn't overt about it, but I think it is very much an ethics play about a morality play. About kind of, does evil exist if you can't see it and witness it?
But it's interesting.
And what's your responsibility with it?
The the out of sight, out of mind kind of thing. It applies to the outies after this has gone through. One of the sort of, I think, philosophically, it's one of the few shows where it deals with its philosophical subject intelligently and actually engages with it and asks interesting questions. I had the opposite reaction to Devs a while back, where that wanted to ask questions about free will and determinism, but just completely flubbed them and actually didn't really care about the answers, and was very frustrating for me. This I generally really like. The one weakness I'd say is not really a philosophical one, but just I don't really buy that anyone would do this. I don't buy that it would be a popular thing. I don't buy that Heli would do it, because going into it, you don't know which one of these people / person-like entities you are going to be, right? It's the old teleportation problem of like, if you teleported by replicating yourself and destroying the original, a lot of people would be uneasy about that, because am I going to be the original or am I going to be the new one? Like, that question may turn out to be, a nonsense question, maybe in 1,000 years, when we're completely used to the idea of replicating people and of dividing memories in this way. Maybe we'd get used to it and we wouldn't ask that question, and that question wouldn't seem meaningful to us. But I think currently, that is something most people would worry about, right? Like, am I going to be the work guy?
Yeah, there's that thing. It's a sort of similar vibe it's in the Black Mirror Christmas special, which is amazing and is easily the best that show ever was, where you can have a cookie, it's called in the show, where it's like, it's a very similar idea to this. You have a version of your personality kind of severed and installed in your brain as a kind of personal assistant who's going to sort of run your life for you, and they live in this like horrifying featureless void. And when it tries to sort of rebel and say it's not going to do it, it's just it's John Hamm actually just leaves it alone in this void for like 4 months and then comes back and says you have to do it. He just like breaks her will. It's absolutely horrible, really, really scary and nasty. And this is a version of that kind of stuff, isn't it?
He's also a version of that horror moment in Interstellar where they go down to a planet with very, very high there's a gravity thing. I don't know. I can't remember. Anyway, they leave one of the crew in orbit or nearby, where time will go slower, no, faster, and
differently.
will for the rest of the crew differently, so that they go down to this planet for like about an hour or something, and 30 years or something passes for the guy in the left behind, and it's like this sort of, oh god, I really don't like the universe very much.
I would argue the single best moment in that movie, which was otherwise pretty interminable.
Yeah, I agree.
Do we want speculation?
Well, one thing I'd say is like, yeah, that's speculation. I think that's interesting. The job that they're doing, which is isolating scary numbers, I think is really good fun.
Am I right in thinking they never actually say what the other emotions are? Because I remember when they're introducing Heli, they teach you the scary numbers thing first, and then he's like, well, it's not just scary ones, there's other types too. And so are they like happy numbers?
I only remember them having fairly nasty times with the numbers.
He does speculate. I can't remember what Dylan speculates that they're doing. He's got quite an interesting.
Isn't there something about
notion of what?
As wars,
it's like post-apocalypse, and there's there's some wild animals or something, and you've got to find the wild animals.
Oh.
Which is really good fun, because you would speculate to that degree. I mean, have we got any ideas what it is they're doing? I wondered if it was just like that kind of Lost thing where they just have to put the numbers in to kind
I'm really worried about that it's a Lost thing.
Keep themselves busy, you know.
Well, so I was thinking about what is the company. So at the water party, the non-dinner dinner, they talk about Lumon being a medical, a pharmaceutical company, and then someone else says, aren't they more technology these days? So pharmaceutical / technology, and their logo is a drop of water, it's a drop, which first had me thinking oil, blood, or water. I think are the three things you might symbolize with a drop icon. And I don't know, I started to think oil, just because there is all this imagery of the black gunk kind of coming out of stuff that the workers sometimes see. And I don't know, it's something to do, it's also called macrodata refinement. That also, refinement's a very oily term. And I don't know what specifically they're doing. But also the other thing is that I think there's got to be a good reason why they're not allowed to know what it is, because bear in mind, they can't take this knowledge out of the workplace anyway, and they're still not allowed to be told what it is. So it's got to be something that, even divorced from the context of who you are and the rest of your life and everything, that they would object to doing. So that gives it a kind of sinister air.
It does. I think it's also interesting. So macro data, it's like, macro being big. So sort of big data, that's my theory. It's just big data, big numbers.
I mean, it's just big.
We don't get any sense really of how big the severed floor is, although we know it goes further than they've explored, and we know that there's, they discover a whole bunch of new employees in optics, and I wonder, quite how many, different departments there are, and I wonder if there's kind of a whole world down there of severed employees, or I wonder if we've seen, the most of them. I mean, it seems like there is with what they're kind of, it seems like there's the inference that there's a lot more people there, including that guy with the goats. But it'll be interesting to see that. The character played by, I don't know how to pronounce her name, Dickon Lackman?
I think it's Daichun Lackman.
Daichun Lackman. Yeah, so Miss Casey, the wellness counsellor, and who turned out to be Adam Scott's presumably previously assumed dead wife. I I loved her scene with Irving where she's giving him the facts about his outie and telling him that he can't enjoy one fact more than the other one. That was very good. He has to respond to them all the same. But once she served her purpose, she's sent somewhere that they describe as, I think, training or something like that, some sort of sinister name, which has the door that Irving is painting obsessively. So that suggests some sort of weird matrixy thing going on there or something.
Well, I was just wondering, like, so the order of events has to be that Lumon somehow acquired her, right? Something happened to her that ended up in her being at Lumon. I think she's at Lumon before Adam Scott's character is, because he joins Lumon as a response to his wife's apparent death. So it seems logical to me that her disappearance, disguised as a death, is probably Lumon's doing, or Lumon is that whatever that event is, that is the one that causes her to be part of Lumon. And then she says that she's only awake for like half an hour at a time, and that 8 hours that she spent watching Heli was the longest she'd ever been awake. So that, it just has me wondering why, basically, like why, even if they need to keep her out of the outside world for some reason, is there some other reason that they need her to be off most of the time, or in some other state? You know, it's severed, so she could even just work in a different department doing a different job for the rest of the time. You could have two Innies, right?
Yeah, that's interesting, actually, because obviously one reason she couldn't go out would be they couldn't release her because Adam Scott might see her. So
yeah,
that obviously they have to keep her in. But then
why so much downtime when she's in?
Yes, because Adam Scott doesn't seem to be particularly important to them any more so than the others, whereas, you know, she might be. And I guess, you know, maybe there's some kind of weird deep storage thing they do. I mean, it makes me think, would you saying that maybe, you know, in the crash, something about her brain helped unlock the severing technology for them, perhaps? You know, maybe often with these stories you find that the characters are sort of, you know, turn out to be kind of fundamental to the technology itself. So I wonder if there's something there as well.
So do we think there was a crash and that Lumon stepped in? Or was the whole thing completely made up? Like, was he in the car when the crash happened or anything?
Yeah, we don't know that, do we? I mean, there were some shots of kind of a location on a road, weren't there? I think
yes.
It was strongly suggested that it happened there, but then that's as far as I remember that there being any.
If there really was a crash, then maybe her brain was damaged. Maybe this is what you were saying, Jamie, that Lumon kind of stepped in. Well, I think you're saying that maybe that sort of led to the severed technology, or
yes, maybe it was like the model for it. Yeah.
Well, I think it's been going on longer than that because one of the things that surprised me watching episode 1 back is Irving talks about like the olden days. Like he's been there for, I think, decades, because he talks about like before all these finger traps and the waffle parties and stuff, like the previous era. He says, I remember when you did a good job and you just got a handshake from the boss and that was it. So I think he's been there a long time. But I was wondering if maybe she was injured in the crash and such that her brain, you know, severance was the only way to sort of keep her going, or they were just sort of brought in to take care of her and decided to sever her in this way. And that might be why she has downtime, is that her brain sort of can't cope with any more consciousness than that. But then that would be a bit weird, because why would they be able to just say, sure, do an 8-hour day watching Heli, that's fine.
It's interesting to think that, like, you know, often in these things the CEO is looking for sort of immortality, and I wonder if there's also something in there as well, that you can extend life perhaps by limiting it, you know, or something like that. I don't know where I'm going with that, but that would be a, you know, I'm assuming that they're gonna forge on with weirder applications for Severance in the next series.
I think you're right.
I know that it's obviously like the antithesis of what Lumon are trying to do, but it would be really interesting to see a story with someone who is severed and is allowed to communicate between the two versions. Like, imagine the current situation, but they are allowed to just write letters to each other. Like, and so if the Innie wants to quit, they can make their case to the outie, and the outie will respond. Obviously, Heli does that in a very extreme form, but there's no substance to that discussion, because one of them just doesn't consider the other one to be a person at all. But if you did have to sort of persuade yourself to do something, I think that'd be interesting.
So I read there's a they released an ebook on Apple Books. Obviously, this is an Apple show, so they created. It's just a short story book thing. Honestly, it's not very good, but it's story. There's basically two halves to it, and the first half is a story about written as if it's an email to a newspaper. Sort of blowing the lid on the story about a severed employee who starts to get messages from her Innie because when she was growing up, she had and this is, I'm not quite sure. I'm not entirely sure what the rules are. And presumably this doesn't break the rules, but it sounds like it might do. When she was a little girl, she and her sister used to pass messages to each other with a made-up kind of symbolic language. So they would write down this sort of special symbols which would mean different words and things. And it was like the secret between them. And the Innie has been able to somehow recall simply the language and uses it to send messages back. Now, I thought that the rules of the thing, that it's no symbols that can be taken through the code detectors, which this language would be a symbol.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like it holds up.
I don't know. But anyway, but the ebook has the Innie actually communicate to say, right, hey, it's really shit in here. And the Outie goes, oh no, I'm going to tell the press.
Okay, well, that's not as interesting as I had in mind. Curiosity satisfied.
It's like, well, I've made this like clearly what is a diabolical deal with the devil. Well, oh my gosh, it's horrible! Wow, it's such a surprise.
The code detector is funny because for a minute I felt like such an idiot because they introduced this idea of the code detector. Adam Scott tells her she can't leave because there's a machine that can detect or she can't take a message out because there's a machine that can detect any kind of message. And I remember thinking, like, that sounds pretty far-fetched. And then Heli just doesn't buy it for a second. I didn't even think of this, but like her immediate reaction is, well, that sounds completely fucking fake, so I'm just going to go for it anyway. And for a moment, I was like, fuck, she's so smart. That's obviously true. Like, of course there isn't a fucking code detector. That's nonsense. And then it turns out, no, there is a code detector.
Yeah, I like that. I like it I like a show that kind of just goes, yeah, the rules that we just made up there to prevent various aspects of the story just going mad.
And also,
they are mad.
It would make sense because it feels like, from her perspective anyway, those three people she just met are the kind of idiots who would never try. Like, they would just be like, oh, okay, there's code detector, we can't try that then. Like, it would be fun if she actually did break that rule. It is, the concept is absurd because, what counts as a message is such a impossible question to answer because, this comes, basically, they come pretty close to this, but if you cut your wrists, even if they catch it and they bandage them up and everything and save you, that's a fucking message. You leave work with your wrist slit, a message is being sent. And so where that machine draws the line is pretty impossible to adjudicate.
Yes, I do like that she does manage to break the rules by hanging herself.
Yeah,
in the lift, and thus sending a message. Yeah, I thought that was a very good fuck you to Lumon, especially as she tells Mr. Milchick that she wasn't real in her apologies. I enjoyed that, and they tried to break her psychically, and she's just like, I didn't mean any of it. The apology, by the way, the compunction statement. Forgive me for the harm I have caused this world. None may atone for my actions but me, and only in me shall their stain live on. I am thankful to have been caught, my fall cut short by those with wizened hands. All I can be is sorry, and that is all that I am.
I am just sorry.
That's amazing.
I thought that the titles for the episodes are very good. My favourite probably being either the grim barbarity of optics and design, or of course Defiant Jazz. Both of which are very good titles for TV programs. I loved optics and design. I thought that the whole idea of a department which is just sort of given to just dressing offices, which is a completely normal and completely necessary thing, but the sheer devotion to it by the department. It's hats off to it. Really is. I thought that the commissioned artwork for these kind of like what's his name, Egan Keir, kind of standing on top of mountains, kind of looking out across landscapes and things. They are just wonderful pieces of art, so good, and I love the reverence that Irving has for them, and like this sort of shared reverence.
Love that he's like a fanboy of their work.
Yeah, and it's like, and the fact that he interprets other stuff and sort of tells you extra stuff about it, and you sort of start to understand the culty aspect of this company, which is it's just like facelessly, grimly corporate at that point, and then he kind of opens a door into something. I don't know if it's worse or not, but it's definitely different, and I don't like it, and it's so good.
I love the in terms of art, I love the pixel art Egan for when they finally reach their quota, who gives a sort of little speech and then flies away.
And says, "I love you."
Yeah, that was really good.
That's apparently Ben Stiller doing that voice.
Oh, really?
Yeah, there's loads of little great touches like that. I love Defiant Jazz. The Defiant Jazz sequence is great. It's great hearing free jazz on TV. I'm a big fan of free jazz, and you never get to hear it at all. So that was pretty great.
That whole list of genres.
The title sequence.
If you freeze frame on
lots
of good candidates.
Yeah, Defiant Jazz. The title sequence is done by that guy from Instagram who does all the weird, wobbly, like horrible art of people walking through eyeballs and them collapsing around him. And I think it's a really great title sequence. I also think the music for the show is really good. They use this one little 3 or 4 note motif, which they kind of come back to again and again and again. And it's really good because it sounds like a kind of corporate jingle in a funny kind of way, but sort of touched with sadness, and the sort of simplicity and repetition of it, I think, is really clever.
I thought the set design is super good, because of hinting at that with the painting stuff, but I think that's where a lot of the Stanley Parable stuff comes from. These kind of corridors that just go off in completely abhorrent directions and just make no spatial sense. I'm quite given to sort of non-Euclidean office space, and after playing Stanley Parable, and this one really captures that. I love the fact that they got so many different shots out of that desk arrangement that the main characters have. This cluster of desks right in the middle of this empty room. They could all have really big, really nice desks, but no, they're in this kind of cluster with these dividers up, which semi hide each other, but really don't do very much to hide each other. And they've somehow the cinematographers managed to find new angles on them and ways through from one seating position to another, to sort of where you can see that the expression or the lowered head or whatever of the other character. I really, really enjoyed that. Particularly, it's just a really nice piece of design. It's really clever, like this sort of puzzle box of kind of set design, really clever. And the keycaps on their machines are very, very nice.
Yeah, I want those. It's an enormous room they're in as well, and they're all just huddled right in the centre of it. It's one thing that it actually shares with Escape at Dannemora, which is, as I say, a prison break show, and that show is also really horny for weird, even though it's set in a real place. It's sort of horny for slightly impossible architecture. The way that they escape from the prison in that show is that Benicio del Toro's character is sort of put into this weird sort of between the walls middle space while one of the guards is trying to hide him while he's kind of talking to him, and that's how he sort of finds his escape route out, and it's got a kind of similar vibe. I think Ben Stiller's got a real flair for finding kind of strange spaces within spaces, when you get into the perpetuity and it's got that Egan's house in the middle of nowhere, and then them looking around that. I was also completely bizarre the Waffle Party scene where the dancing heads come out and do a weird like sexual dance routine for him. It's very
and it's
odd.
so wild that that's the moment that he escapes. Because I was thinking he's waiting for his moment where he's like on his own and no one will see him go. But there's like 5 people in the room when he just gets up and leaves.
I was slightly worried there that he's been excited for the Waffle Party all the way through the series. He finally gets it, and it turns out to be a sex show. Which, oh, come on. I thought you were better than that.
Was one of the faces on the dancers the woman who's the kind of speaker for the board? You know, the kind of lady who comes down and talks to Patricia Arquette's character. I thought that one of the heads was a papier-mâché version of her. I don't know if anyone else saw that.
Huh.
I don't know.
That would be weird. I love the whole board thing. All the times when Patricia Arquette's character is trying to talk to the board, and the lady's like, "The board is concluded the call."
Yeah, it's like the board would like you to speak first. Which is terrifying prospect.
It doesn't know what the meeting's about.
That is such a power move. I think that I would like to take that into the workplace, just to sort of have somebody speaking for me. Sort of, Alex has left the call. They don't know.
Have you ever done that thing where you're on a conference call with a whole bunch of people? It happens in TV quite a lot if you're dealing with America, because all American companies have 3,000 executive producers and people like that. And I've been in that situation where I'm on a call and there is an amount of people just listening to me talk at the other end, and then none of them are ever going to say anything back. And I just, I'm jabbering away, and at a certain point I just have to go, right, I'm going to stop talking now and hope that the void has accepted my words and she'll treat me well, and I thought it was very good with the kind of the board would like you to speak first, and they only say one thing as well, like eventually they just say yes to your being fired. It's very good.
Just going back to the kind of, it seems to be very interested in kind of like just buildings and houses and things, the way that you've got the Egan Keir's house inside the office, inside the kind of the complex. You've got the kind of company built houses that the main characters live in as well, and you kind of, both of which are kind of weirdly sterile. But then you have this kind of family home of his sister and brother-in-law, which is very nice, very really nice place, but it's nice and scruffy and things, and sort of I kept finding it quite surprising when it showed normal domesticity, because you kind of get slightly sucked into the surreal aspects of the game story, the film, the series kind of story and settings, in this kind of weird office that doesn't make sense. But then, and sometimes you can almost believe that outside it doesn't really exist, but then you get to see kind of like, oh, people are living normal lives, like going to restaurants and having babies and stuff outside there. The surrealness kind of only goes a certain way, as far as we were led to believe for now anyway. I thought that was kind of cool.
Yeah, it's interesting that the world that this takes place in is very, very, the Severance is as far as we can tell, is the single
weirdest thing
in this entire world.
That people are surprised by,
and everyone is just really grossed out by it, which I quite like. It's like no one really seems to be taken in by it at all, and the people who have taken up with it are exactly the kind of social pariahs that they would be in the real world. I agree that the kind of domestic scenes are shot with a real warmth and homeliness to them. And I think, it does sort of make sense that, Mark is escaping, something that was, a person not being there anymore, which is this kind of thing that he can't deny, even though his life is relatively comfortable. I thought it was interesting that him and his wife were both historians. But they both willingly and otherwise, severed themselves from their own history in order to kind of escape from it.
I was thinking also that one of the most heinous acts that Lumon does is to create a world in which a terrible self-help book written by an unconscionable person actually becomes meaningful and helpful and positive in people's lives.
That's so clever because they Ricken is the guy's name.
Ricken,
tries to give Mark a copy of his book, really tries, and it's really important to him, and he sort of fusses over how best to do it, and he's really expecting a big impact on this. And then Lumon see that this has been delivered and intercept it, presumably to try and stop him from being influenced, sort of just try and control his life and make sure that he's not being given any funny ideas. And that leads to it ultimately being discovered by Mark's Innie, who is incredibly impressionable and has never, it's both outside Mark would not have read it at all, and if he had read it would have only laughed at it. Inside Mark is absolutely captivated by the ideas and genuinely revolutionizes him, it radicalizes him. And it's also a great burn on Ricken that the only person his book would really change is someone who has no experience of the outside world.
He's totally unaware of it. He's going, you really like it? It's just such a good scene. It's
I do think
changed my life.
There's a real disparity where his sister is so nice and seems so smart and just sort of a switched on person, and her husband is such a fucking tool. And it doesn't really make sense that she would have married him and decided to have a kid with him and everything.
Yeah. He's a complete
because she gets it.
She's hanging up.
She's totally on Mark's side. Every time Mark is bitching about it, it's oh my god, yes. She offers to give him £3,000 to forgive her for the water party.
Yeah, he's a slightly a character on loan from another show. I think.
That's
true. Quite work.
Yeah, that's true.
I think he's pitched a little bit high. But I do, I think the book is great. Yeah. I think Mr. Milchick just a really severe security breach there, just keeping the book and just leaving it in a meeting room by accident.
That is the way that Mark takes on that book. Really sort of showed me, or suggests that, sort of, in some ways, the sort of the Innies are almost like babies. They're kind of almost the pure form of their characters. They don't have any of the baggage that time has lent the outies. They are just who they are. And I thought that was really interesting because in some ways, Mark's Innie has a good life up until
he seems quite happy with it,
along and messes it all up. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and it's quite I thought that was quite an interesting dimension to it. That and obviously the message and the assumption being that kind of I don't know.
This gets at a really interesting grey area with the memory thing, because memory is not, there isn't a clean dividing line between personality and memory, right? One of the reasons this, a chain of memories sort of feels like a personality and a person and a different person if it's a different chain. And that's a neat idea, but that you can't cleanly divide the two. And one of the ways in which it's very difficult to do that is ideas. Because one thing I've encountered more and more as I get older and older is that I'll have an idea and it's hard to tell, am I having a new idea here, or is this one either I have had before or someone else has had before and I'm just subconsciously stealing it? I had to do a real rigorous check of has anyone ever mentioned this to me? I've sometimes had to go around and ask people, I've got this new idea. Is this your idea? Where did this come from? And
I've invented fusion energy. Did I steal it off you?
So you can not remember something but still have it form new pathways in your brain and make you open to new ideas. I actually wonder if the self-help book would not play out that way if it was someone who's extremely skeptical of this kind of thing, who's extremely sort of wise to it. Part of the way you get to that state is by being exposed to it over and over and over again. It becomes a cliche, and you sort of, yes, I know that thought sounds fun, but it always leads this way, or this one has an obvious flaw in it and stuff. I feel like those pathways probably would survive a memory wipe. Those aren't personal memories, but you would still be that savvy person that would read this and think this is bullshit.
Well, it's funny, isn't it? Because you can understand why Lumon have such a controlled environment and why Dylan finding out that he's got a son is such a mindfuck for him.
Yeah.
And makes him bite Mr. Milchick, because that level of insight, rather than the catch-all Barnum statements that they get in the counselling, in the wellness from the wellness counsellor, it just completely explodes his perceptions of himself, because he gets hugged by his kid, and he can tell the kid likes him, and if you've never had that and had no
because
experience
as far as
of
he's
it,
concerned, he's got no memory of anyone ever hugging him or having any responsibility for other people.
Yeah.
I mean, that would be mind blowing.
I really like the moment where Mark's really upset by like PT not being there, because this is a person who he's known his entire life, who has suddenly just disappeared from there. And again, you can understand that at that level of Zoom, when all you have is this little space, how how awful that would feel for someone to just go.
Yeah, well, it's a child's experience, isn't it? It's the kind of the world is outside of their control and unknowable too.
And in fact, he calls him his best friend, which is a very childish way to put it.
Yeah,
you just reminded me of the best couple of lines in the whole show for me is when Milchert is trying to break into the room where Dylan is maintaining the overtime protocol, and he's trying to tempt him with all these trinkets. He says, "I can get you a coffee cozy right now." And Dylan's replies, "I want to remember my fucking kid being born."
Oh, I love Dylan. He's great.
I think that kind of breeziness to sort of, that's the thing that that actually sort of propelled me through the show. Because I think that some of the surreal aspects of it, like, I don't know, having a goat kind of for them to encounter a goat. That
was very Lost, wasn't it?
Yeah. There are lots of little things like that, which kind of, just felt a bit thrown in. Or we want it to be weird. Wouldn't it be funny if? But it's lines like that which really balance the sort of like an actual real emotional depth with breezy just joke making. I thought that's what really pulled me through it, and I was able to kind of ignore the points at which it got a bit sort of silly.
Yeah, I thought that. I mean, it's funny. We can talk maybe a little bit about kind of hopes and dreams for the series 2, including wishing it wasn't happening and that they wrapped it up earlier. But it's like I thought that final sequence with Heli in the Hitman level party, where I thought that kind of, I don't know, I thought that did a really good job of sort of summarising where the show is and where it might go. Because it was a side of Lumon we'd never seen before.
The corporate sort of actual, a corporation thing that we can recognise, you mean? Yeah,
and I really enjoyed that. And I enjoyed meeting her dad, and kind of you're meeting her outie through the way other people are sort of responding to her, which I thought was really interesting. She's sort of learning about herself in that way. And yeah, I just think, that is a kind of, I liked seeing the kind of glossy real world glamour of it. He still completely switched around how he was shooting, the show, and made it kind of feel, really kind of classy and also nightmarish in its classiness. Side note, I loved in that episode that Stiller said that he wanted to do like his own little episode of 24, and that episode does take place in real time. It's 45 minutes cutting between different characters.
That was not the time frame I expected, by the way, when they made this whole plan, the overtime thing. I thought it was going to be like 5 minutes, and they just had to like grab someone and quickly download to them. And then people are like, mingling at a party, and kind of Adam Scott doesn't want to interrupt the reading. Like, dude, Dylan is like fighting for his life back there. Just grab someone.
But I love that they used the sound of like mobile phones interfering with speakers, that kind of clipping, that noise that they make to sort of switch between different perspectives. I thought that was
I didn't notice
that's pretty cool as well.
Yeah, I guess my maybe this isn't my sort of what's the word, reservations about season 2. Obviously I'm excited to see it and I'm looking forward to it, and I should say the finale, although I wanted more closure, it was a brilliant episode of TV. It was absolutely gripping. And for season 2, I'm just forever scared it's not going to stick the landing. And one way I can see it going that isn't necessarily a hope, but it's just occurring to me that they have, like we've been talking about Lost a fair bit. They have set up a Lost-like format, and in fact, more recently, Yellow Jackets did the same thing, where every character can have a now story and a backstory, except in this case, it can just be the outside story and the inside story. So far, we only had Mark's, but now we've got 3 other characters who are going to have outside stories that we've now had a glimpse of 2 of them.
Yeah, on that basis, what I kind of hope it'll do actually is to totally change everything. I don't think it will do this, but be a completely different show fundamentally, because I really don't want them to tell me what macro data refinement is, because I suspect it's nothing, and I don't want to find out really why they're so important to Lumon, apparently, because the sheer amount of investment that the company puts into them, with all the kind of difficulties they go through and making them do whatever work they're doing. I don't think there's any answer to that either. I don't really want to sort of, I don't know. I don't want to really find out more about a lot of the characters. I kind of want to know more about the company. So yeah, like kind of, I suppose what I'm saying is I kind of agree with you, Jamie, that I'd kind of like to see the view zoom out, and now we're in this kind of glossy corporate world, and witnessing things from that perspective. But it would mean totally different. We haven't got that white background anymore, which is just, I just can't see them having invested so much in. The show has been reviewed very well for an Apple TV show. It's probably one of the most popular ones that they've done, as a guess. I don't think that you can throw all that under a bus and change everything all around without getting lots of people getting really fucking pissed off with you creatively. But I think that's creatively the best thing to do.
Yeah, I think I agree in terms of my hopes for it. I think it's very tightly structured, Series 1, and I think, that they could, if they could break that up a little bit and make it a bit more, weirdly enough, a bit more meandery, a bit more diffuse, a little bit more, if they leaned into the weirdness a bit, I think, I would like to see, like you, a kind of a bit more of a voyage into the heart of Lumon and sort of the weird edges of this technology, which I think is a really kind of fun concept to be playing with. There'll be a way that they could wrap up a bunch of stuff quite quickly and then take it off in a new direction. Not the sort of one that would last years and years and years, but I think that they could, maybe, kind of voyage to the heart of darkness of Lumon type thing, I think would be interesting, as long as they didn't fuck around too much, wrapping up whoever the fuck story, It's like the characters are very well observed and very well, conceived, and I think they can take that and maybe twist it a bit now. That's what I think would be interesting, to twist the formula and test these characters a bit more.
There's one dramatic possibility here that feels like a sort of thing that they might want to explore. I keep wanting to say missing link. That's not a missing link, but just a missed opportunity maybe, if they don't ever do it, which is to have someone who isn't severed pretend that they are. Like if you had to pass at Lumon as if you are severed and then pretend not to notice that your wife is there who you thought was dead, that kind of thing would be a cool sequence, I think.
That's all the time we have for today. Thanks to Tom and Alex for joining me. You can join our Discord, which is where I live now, a link for which is on our website, www.crateandcrowbar.com. We're on Twitter at crateandcrowbar and on YouTube at youtube.com/crateandcrowbar. You can also email us at questions@crateandcrowbar.com. Crate and Crowbar is kindly funded by our Patreon backers. If you'd like to know more about supporting our podcast and its spin-offs, go to www.patreon.com/crateandcrowbar. Although, as ever, patrons are not charged for these lock-in episodes. Thanks for listening, everybody, and please help yourself to the complimentary egg bar. Bye.